Okay, so today we're going to learn how to pick up, walk around with, and rotate items that have physics on them. So to start with, I'm going to make a new scene, create new scene. We're just going to call this item interaction. Okay. So now in our item interaction, I'm going to drop in this Moog model that my friend Sunny made. So you could see that he modeled it in a way that kind of has its axis off center here. So what we'll do is we can actually just unpack this prefab, and I'm going to get rid of this camera that it came with. I'm going to just take the model here, and I'm going to zero it out. Okay, so now we should be nice and square with everything else. It is actually a bit longer, so I think what I'll do is I'll maybe scooch it over to the side like that. Yeah, now that's looking more zeroed out. So now that that's all set up, we're going to put a collider on it. We're going to put a box collider and make it so the size is roughly the size of this. So to go into orthographic, you can click up here. So this is perspective mode from this side, this angle, and you can flip angles up here. But you can also click it again while you're already in it to go into orthographic mode. And that's sort of like the mathy way of looking at things, so it gets all flattened out and everything's very perfect. Now that it's here, I'm gonna just get back to sorting out the size of this box, and I'm gonna move it up right there, make it a little bigger on that axis, and then I'm going to make it a little wide, or shrink it down. Go to the side, gonna do the same thing over here on the z-axis. Gonna make it a little bit bigger. Scooch it over a tad. There, that's looking good. So now that everything's lined up, let's make sure, yep. Now that everything's lined up, let's just get out of orthographic view, go back into perspective. We can add, let's do it this way. We're just gonna make a create empty game object. We're gonna rename it by hitting F2. We're gonna call this like object controls, and we're going to come over here, add component, type in FSM, going to add a Playmaker FSM, and we'll call this also object controls FSM. Going to hit edit, so it's going to bring open our Playmaker FSM down here. And so what do we want to do? We want to have it so that when you left click it, you are going to pick it up, and if you let go, it'll drop. And then if you right click it, it'll rotate. But you can only right click it once you pick it up. So you have to pick it up with left click, and then still holding left click, you click right click to rotate it. And then letting go of right click will then put you back to the first state. So let's get that going. So when you have this open, you can click Action Browser down here, just in case your Action Browser isn't already open. And I just docked mine right here. It's a good place to put it. And we're going to put mouse down, get mouse button down. And the first one we're going to do is left click. And we're going to make a new event here in the send event area. We're going to call it select object. You can name this whatever you want. Eventually you can kind of get to a point where you're just putting finished on everything that is menial enough. But this is a good way to keep things organized. So we're going to go over here to this transition we just added, this select object transition, and we're going to get out of this state right here, state 1, right? So this is looking to be clicked. You could name it that, right? So that's what this state is, and this is where everything starts. We want to get out of here once we click, once we get a mouse button down, left, we're going to send this event select object. So the event that we're going to send to, if you click over here, holding control, and then let go, it'll create a new state over here. Alternatively, you can do add state, but we're just going to do this. So you're going to add a mouse pick, I believe it is. Yeah, so This mouse pick is wherever you're clicking on the screen, it's sending a ray out and going to store the information of whatever that ray hit. So he says, perform a mouse click on this screen from the main camera and stores the results. Use ray distance to set how close the camera was. Okay, so the store game object, not the store did pick object, but the store game object, we're going to create a new variable. And we're going to call this item selected. Okay, and we're going to leave the rest of that stuff by itself. So we're going to call this item selected. We can even call it, honestly, item grabbed, because that's what we're going to be doing here. So what do we want to do? We want to have it so that when you click it, it kind of puts it in front of your face, right? So we need to take a step back a little bit, and we need to make a character, right? So we're going to do a couple things here. We're just going to add a ground, 3D object, cube, okay? And then we're going to just flatten it out and make it nice and wide. Okay, put it right there. So now we have our ground. And on it, we're going to add component, rigid body, and in the rigid body, we're going to tick off use gravity. We're going to make sure that's empty. And then is kinematic could be set. So we have our ground here that we can now walk on, but we don't have a character. So what we're going to do is you can go to the asset store, and then there is a nice little free asset that Sunny showed me that has been pretty useful for testing stuff out, which is called the all-in-one first person. Let's see. It's like, there we go, FP All-in-One right here by Aiden Graves. So you can click on that, you can download it and import it. So over here in my first person AO pack, in the first person AO subfolder, AIO, we're going to drag in this prefab, first person AIO prefab. Okay, so back in our scene over here, you can see our characters right here. And let's see. Yeah, so you should be able to just press play. Right, and now we can walk around. Okay, I'm using the arrow keys because I'm left-handed, you'll use WASD. Okay, so that all checks out, as it should. And now we're going to kind of put in how this is going to interact with our keyboard here. So in the first person AIO, you have a couple things. You have the head joint and you have the player camera. So what we want to do is we want this head joint because that's kind of the center point of the character's head, and that player camera, it rotates around with it. So we know that however this AIO is designed, this head joint is sort of like the pivot point of it. That's like its main like center of axis, right? So what we want to do is in our object controls, we can do a move object. And for move object, the object to move, we're going to click over here. We're going to specify game object. This little gray box this size is going to let us pick a variable. And the variable we're going to select is item selected. So now the object that we clicked over here that got stored into item selected, it is going to be the thing that we're using to move. So the destination we want is right in front of our face, right? So what we could do is on this head joint object of our character, we're going to right click on it. We're going to create a 3D object. We're going to create a cube. Okay. Now, if you move this cube forward, you'll see that it's in front of our face now, right? So we'll say that like right wherever you put this cube is where items are going to end up when you pick them up. So let's say right about here. Right about here is good because we'll shrink down this thing after. It's a little big to put right in front of your face. But so that's where we'll have them. You could turn off your mesh renderer now, so it's invisible. And we'll also turn off its box collider because we don't want it interacting with anything. And we'll call this cube player chosen item. Okay. So in this move object, we said we want to get the item that we selected and we want to send it to. We're going to move it over to this destination. So our destination now is this player chosen item. right? So now when you move your head around, this player chosen item object, that cube we just made, will rotate with your head at all times. So that means when this goes over here, it's also going to rotate. It's going to move there. We're going to take care of the rotation next. So after you've done that, we want to, let me see. You also have the ease types. You can kind of do some fun animation things here. I like to put punch. It's kind of like a nice little animation. And we'll do real time, and we'll change this to 0.5 just so it's a little quicker. Okay, so let's see what happens when we do this now. Okay, it's running. Now I'm going to click this. See? Now it's snapped in front of our head. Okay, so that works. Doesn't do anything else now, right? So we're going to go on to the next step, which is we want to make it so after it does that move, it stays there. So the move that we're going to do now is we're going to get position. Okay, we're going to put it after that move object. And the game object that we're going to get the position of, we're going to specify it. It's going to be that player chosen item. So we're saying, hey, where's that player chosen item? And we're going to check every frame. So it's while it's in the state, it's constantly checking where that little cube is in front of us. So as we move around, it'll constantly update that information that says where it is. So you have four things here. You have a vector and you have X, Y, Z. So a vector really is just X, Y, Z, but here it just kind of lets you pick one or two of these if you wanted to store them separately. But we'll take the whole damn thing. We'll take vector. So we're going to make a new variable for this. And we're going to call this our player chosen item underscore vector 3, right? I'm just going to call it v3. And these things, you can name them whatever you want. I'm just, you just want to make sure that they're illustrative of what they represent. You want to be clear. You want to be organized here. So at least we know here that it's the player chosen item vector 3, which is that item over here, that vector 3 information. So now that we have that and every frame checked and it's constantly checking where it is, we want to set position. We want to get a set position. So we're going to put a set position in down here. Now for the set position, we're going to select specify game object. And the game object here, again, if we use a variable, could be item selected. So now we're going to tell the item selected, like, hey, this is where you want to be. And where do we want to put it? This vector 3 player chosen item. So it's going to match whatever we've selected to wherever that cube is in front of our face. Now what you have to remember is that everything in a state goes in a descending order unless it has every frame checked. So you're going to have all these things happen sequentially from top to bottom, which means that it'll move the object first and then it'll start setting it in that position. So we want it to be every frame. So you might end up kind of seeing some of that snappiness change a little bit. And, that's just things that you're going to have to work out with timing in this. Alternatively, you can send to another state. And there's other ways to do this. But for what we're doing here, this is a simple way to do things without getting too messy. So now what we're going to do is test it. Now that it just says we're going to set that position. We're going to do it to every frame. Let's play it. Okay, so you click it, goes to you, and as you can see, as I move my head around, it moves the object. But now the problem is that the selected item doesn't go up and down. We can look up and down, but that doesn't go with us. So what I realized actually is that our chosen item cube, if we turn on the mesh renderer to see where it is, it actually doesn't go up and down. It only pivots with the head joint. So if you take that chosen item and parent it to the camera, now when you move your head around, the cube moves with the camera. So now you should be able to click on it, and now it lifts it up and down as well. Okay, so we're going to turn off our mesh renderer here. And in this in our Playmaker FSM, now that we have that all set up, we are going to make it so you can rotate the item. So we're going to get mouse up, get mouse button up. So this says when you release the mouse button, when the mouse button comes up. So it's a very important thing to realize that mouse button down just means when you click down, not when you tap it and you like let it go again, but only when it's actually clicked and held down. So now over here, what we're looking for is the mouse up. So during this whole time, it will only stay here if the mouse button is down. And now it's saying, hey, we're listening for when the mouse button will be up, and then we could do the next thing. So we're going to leave this on left, and then we're going to do the send event, new event, and we're going to call it dropped. And then you can click here, and it'll add the transition over here. Alternatively, you can do add transition, and it's right there. But, it's a lot easier when you just type it in and you hit this, and it adds it for you. So dropped, we're going to have it get sent back here. Okay. Now, to follow that, we're going to want to make it so you can rotate it, right? That's another mouse button. Oh, I'm sorry. That's a mouse button down. Okay, so now we have a mouse button down. This time, we're looking for a right click. And the event that we want to call now, we're going to call it rotate. Okay, we'll add that transition. And holding control when we click off of this, or when we pull off of this, and let go. Now we'll call this rotate. Oops. So what we're going to do is we're going to get a mouse look. We're going to drop it into our rotate state. And what this does is it says rotates a game object based on mouse movement. Minimum and maximum values can be used to constrain the rotation. So what we want to do is we want to change the game object. It's going to rotate. Select this for variables. Do item selected. So that's what we'll be rotating. And over here is the sensitivity. So we're going to keep this on every frame, right? It's going to be moving around with us as we rotate the mouse. But now we want to put our mouse down, or I'm sorry, our mouse up, right? So the first one we're going to put is for the right click. And we're going to do send event. And we're going to call this one just I'm just going to call it fin for finished. Okay. So when you unclick right, it's going to go back to that you were just grabbing it, that you just had grabbed it. So now you're not going to be rotating it anymore. But also, while we're over here, we want to have it set so if you let go of your left click also, it'll just drop it. So we're going to get mouse button up, mouse button left, and the send event. We're going to do dropped again, and we'll add that. And so from this one, we'll just go back to state 1. So now both of these have it set up when you unclick, when you let go of the left mouse button, it'll just send it back here, which means we'll set it up so it can drop it. So now we should have something that's starting to look closer to picking up and rotating an object. Okay, so I'm going to grab it, okay, and I'm going to hold right click, and you could see it spinning around. But what's kind of uncomfortable is that now we're looking around in the world. So what you could do is you could set it so we turn off that camera movement. Now, in this first person AIO, there is a series of components, one of which is this first person camera setup, which says enable camera movement. So what we want to do is that when we're rotating the object, this box gets unchecked. So we're not looking around. We're only looking now at the object we clicked. So what you could do is clicking here in this state, I'm going to click and drag this component in here. I'm going to let go. And there's a couple options. There's get property and set property. We can either get information from that or we can set information from that. So we're going to set information. And over here in the property, it gives us the list of things that you can control from over here that came with that. So we want enable camera movement, which is right here. And so for us, this set value is already unchecked. By default, it's already unchecked. So what it'll do is when it gets here and it does this, it'll uncheck that box. It'll set it so that's the same thing. So it's deactivating camera movement. So now when we press play, grab it, right? Still move our camera around. But the moment I right click, the item itself is just rotating and now we're not looking around. But our problem here is that now, well, there's a bunch of shit wrong with this, but now we want to make it so you can rotate your camera again after you've unclicked it, right? So what you could do is you could just click on the set property thing, copy it, Control C or Command C, and come into your item grabbed, and then just make sure you come down here and click, and then just paste it. And actually what you could do is you can right click it, and then let's send it to the top, right? So we just want to make sure that that's always the case. That's like one of the first things it does is it sets our camera moving back. And this time we're going to set value. So we're going to click on that, and now that activates the camera. So when we come back here, it activates it. We're also going to copy it again, and we're going to put it in here in the start state, just to be safe when it sends back from here too. So I'm going to also put that at the top again, so it's one of the first things that it updates. And now what we'll be able to do is come over here, grab it, rotate it, let go of rotate, which now lets us move our head again, or even drop it again and lets us rotate our head again. Okay. So that's all set up, but what we want is physics. We want it so we can actually pick it up and drop it, because right now it just hangs in the air. So let's grab our Moog, and we're going to add a component. We're going to add rigid body, and it's going to use gravity. We're going to leave all that by set to default. And honestly, while we're here, let's actually click it, and let's just scale it down a little bit. Let's put it down to 0.6, 0.6, 0.6, mark of the beast. So back in our object controls, this Playmaker FSM, what we want to do is we want to turn off the physics when you've grabbed it. You want to make it so it's not fighting the physics. So we could do the similar thing where if you click on the Moog, we have its inspector over here, and I'm going to click and drag this rigid body component right up here, and we're going to do set property. This time, the property we're going to set is going to be use gravity, and it's unchecked, which is what we want. We're going to turn off gravity for that moment. Okay, now I'm going to copy it, and over here back at the start point, I'm going to paste it. I'm going to move it back at the top, and this time I'm going to enable it. So when we let go of everything, gravity gets turned back on for it, and it gets dropped down. So now, what do we got here? So everything's looking pretty good. You can pick it up, right? You can rotate it. Okay, we're rotating it around. You can let go, so it's just back to holding it. And then if you want to, you can let go, and it drops. But something that kind of sucks is that if your mouse is moving around all over the place and it's not locked to the center of the screen, that means that when you pick this up and you right click, and now your mouse is over here not looking at anything, and we come back to this state where it's just grabbed, that means it's setting that property again, saying, hey, what's stored when your mouse was over here? And there's nothing over here. So when we let go, nothing happens, and our object is stuck in the air. So how do you fix that? Well, it's practice that you need to have, just generally is like what you need to do, I think. I mean, I'd be surprised to hear any game that doesn't use this that is a first person. So you go to set mouse cursor. We want set mouse cursor as the very first thing that happens. We're going to hide it, and we're going to lock it. So that means it's always going to be at the center of the screen. And also, you won't be able to see it. In Unity Editor, for whatever, there's this kind of glitch where you do sort of see it, but when you actually publish the game, you won't be able to see it. So yeah, now you could pick it up and rotate it around. And now you could drop it just fine. Okay. So what just happened, though, is I just clicked that plane that we were on, and it threw us off. And that screws everything up. So the next part of this is that you're going to want to separate all the things that you want to be able to grab from all the things that you don't want to grab. So how you do that by using layers. Each of these objects has a layer it's on. So I'm going to select the Moog, And over here on layer, we're going to add a layer. And the new layer we're going to have is grabbable. Okay, so now that we've created our grabbable layer, we're going to select our Moog, and we're going to change its layer to grabbable. And we're going to say, yes, change the children too. In this mouse pick, this layer mask is set to 0, which means there are 0 layer masks. This lets us choose which layers we're actually interacting with this mouse pick. We're going to change this to 1 and hit tab. And now it added an element for us, element 0, and we could change this to grabbable. So now we're only going to be interacting with grabbable elements on the grabbable layer, I mean. Okay, so here's the thing. When you run this now, and you click on this, you can pick it up, you can let it go, drops, pick it up, spin it around, let it go, drops. But if you click on the floor, you'll see that over here, we're stuck in item grabbed mode. Now the reason that's happening is because we haven't selected anything, because it's saying ignore everything except for grabbed objects, but it still did that. It still did that thing where it fired out the mouse pick. And since nothing was grabbed, you can even see here where it says none, it gets stuck on the move object part. Remember I said everything goes sequentially. So there's no item to move, so it can't finish this state. And so what ends up happening is it gets stuck and doesn't let us go down here to finish these things. So what you could do is come over here and uncheck this. And now, if you click on the floor, it does go back to the original start state. See, clicking all over the place, nothing's getting registered, but at least it's going back to square one. And now that lets us pick this up, drop it, click on everything else. So with this method, I guess you can't use the move forward thing with how it's set up. But there's definitely something you could do where it would check if the item was grabbable. And if it wasn't, then it would send you back here. But if it was, it would go on to this part where it says move object and get position and all that stuff. So maybe I can explain how to do that in another tutorial, but otherwise, this is how you do a pretty basic setup. So you can pick things up, look at them from different angles, and then drop them again. So if you have any questions, you could hit me up in the comments. If you have any requests for tutorials on hella specific shit like this, let me know, and maybe I'll pop a tutorial open for that too.